Hi, this is Hope with the latest installment of Dick Does DC. This is for people who are working on the movie with me called Dick Does DC, specifically about, for anyone else watching, how it is that huge stories can happen in America that are very important to the American voter and the American public, and yet the American public has absolutely no idea that they happened. For instance, one of the issues that we'll go over in a minute is signing statements. I've asked absolutely everyone that I run across walking on the street if they've ever heard of a signing statement. The ratio right now is 2 in 100. And so it just serves to illustrate the fact that there's a lot going on out there that people don't know. So the beginning of this story starts with Dick Cheney. He started in public service way back in the early 60s. He was working for Nixon, and then he went on to be the youngest chief of staff of all time for the Ford administration. During the time that he was in Washington and when he went on to be a congressman during the Reagan administration, he believed that Reagan and Nixon should have been able to perpetrate what they did. For instance, Reagan in the Iran-Contra affair, he believed that Reagan should have been able to sell arms to Iran and use that money to fund the Contras. He supported Reagan's ability to do that. You can see that quoted. I have quotes of him stating that. And then he also supported Nixon. He believed that the president really had supreme power. In the case of the Gulf War, when he was Secretary of Defense, he advised the first Bush not to seek congressional approval for invading Kuwait. They did get approval from the Congress, but if they had not got approval, Dick Cheney simply stated he would have gone in anyway. So he didn't believe in the Congress or anyone else being able to oversee the president. He absolutely believed in presidential, and still does, presidential supremacy. So we're cooking up a little soup here of exactly what this story is. So the next thing that's important is this group here. This is Project for a New American Century, American Enterprise Institute, and Carlyle Group. These are three of the major groups that Dick Cheney is a part of. Project for an American Century, he founded in the mid to early 90s with William Kristol, the grandfather of the Neocon movement, was a right-wing policy think tank. They came out with a position paper, I believe, in the year 2000, basically stating that we needed to increase defense spending, we need to create an American global empire, and that we needed to start that track by invading Iraq. They didn't care if Saddam Hussein was in power or not. That was the place where they wanted to get their foothold in. And so that's Project for a New American Century. That's all, obviously, public knowledge. You can read the paper that they put out. I'm not making that up. American Enterprise Institute is also a group that Dick Cheney is a part of. And when he came out and did his speeches this spring, he was at American Enterprise Institute again. It's a right-wing think tank that looks after corporate interests. So all of the big corporations, or most of the big corporations in America support them. That would be Pepsi-Cola, all of the big gas companies, pretty much anyone that you can think of, AIG, all of those people support these guys. And then these guys come up with policy that's helpful to corporations and try to push that through the government. Carlyle Group is a large hedge fund group where all of these people pool their money, and it's also very heavily funded by defense contractors. So they represent, and part of their group is a lot of defense contractors. So this is kind of the thinking of Dick Cheney. Going on from there, the next thing that Dick Cheney did that's really important is he invented the privatization of war. He did that in 1992 when he was Secretary of Defense, and he had the Pentagon give $9 million to Kellogg, Brown & Root to do a study and see how private contractors could replace the military and the military's work. So it's quite a bit different than regular defense contractors. There's always been defense contractors making supplies. This is not making supplies. This is taking over the military's work, which, of course, it turned out to be great. And the first contract that came out of that was called LogCap. That went to KBR. It was a $2.2 billion contract. And so in that way, we now inserted a profit margin into war making. And so he invented that because he came up with the study that was done that started it. And you can see that quoted all over the place, that the privatization of war really happened in the early 90s with this as its beginning. That's where you get into the military-industrial complex. And that is where you have the mix of the military and industry. So you can see, I think most of us know about Eisenhower, I hope, and the danger of the military-industrial complex. And I'm going to read that one again in another video in a minute. So very, very important. Then we come down here to, of course, in between here, he was CEO of Halliburton. And those statistics are all, you know, in my writings. You can read about how he governed that company and what they did while he had his tenure there. But he was CEO of Halliburton for 5 years in between the Gulf War and becoming VP. As soon as he became VP, he began to push for the war in Iraq. This is not something that I'm just making up. Here is a book by Richard Clarke, Against All Enemies. He was the head of the NSC. He tried to tell the Bush administration that Al-Qaeda was the big major thing that we had to worry about. They constantly argued and told them, no, Iraq is the problem. So they were wrong from the beginning. Why they were wrong, I don't know, but it's good to know that they were wrong. Okay, so he pushed for war in Iraq. The most important thing that happened under Cheney's advice is the Bremer decisions. Within 3 months of getting into the war in Iraq, we completely changed course. What should have been a very short and inexpensive war, we were supposed to be out of there within potentially 6 months originally, became the war that we have now. And the reason is this. Because of decisions that Dick Cheney made within the first 3 months of war, he replaced the initial group of people that were in Baghdad with this man, Bremer. So they hired Bremer. Bremer spoke no Arabic, had never been in the military, and had no Mideast experience at all. So he went right in. This was when he fired the entire army and allowed the looting. And so basically the situation became, the population of Baghdad is 6.5 million people. The population of LA is 4 million people. The situation in Baghdad that we created was 20% unemployment, no security, no police force of any kind. We allowed them to walk away with 3 tons of munitions, so they were heavily armed. We allowed $13 billion worth of looting. There was no water, no electricity. So if you can imagine those situations in LA, you could imagine can you imagine the city of LA with 20% unemployment, completely burned to the ground, no electricity, no water, no police? What would happen in LA? You would kind of know that wouldn't be a good idea. Maybe you wouldn't want to do that in LA. Maybe you wouldn't want to do it in Baghdad more than any other place. But these decisions changed the course of the entire war. It's something very, very few Americans know, and it is obviously actually fact. Where we go from there is as soon as we have this war well underway, we go directly into having private contractors, where do they come from? Where do they come from? They come from up here. The desire to have these people make a lot of money, and this is part of Dick Cheney's, this is his crew right here. So he brought them in, private contractors, and if you study that, you'll see that private contractors ripped off the American people for billions and billions of dollars in Iraq. It's a very unfortunate situation. Cost plus contracts were potentially not the best way to go. And the way that Cheney continued to be able to do this without being alerting the media or being able to do it legally is he used his lawyer, David Addington, and he created a shadow government. So he kept his visibility very, very low. He didn't talk about these programs at all. They just went forward and did the legislation. They wrote policy papers and decided what they were going to do is mix the supreme power of the presidency, which we talked about a minute ago. We're going to mix that with the global domination, world global domination, and we're going to add in making money off of that. So we have a situation here where we have America with one little junta who's just basically running the entire world and can create war anywhere that he wants so that his friends can make money. Yeah, that's what happened. That is exactly what happened. That is just a straight speaking out of the facts. And so that is I think you would agree, highly dangerous.